Montana Territory, 1877. The wind howled through the Judith Basin as the stagecoach wheels groaned over frozen ruts, and Vera Ashcombe sat stiff-backed, hands clenched in her lap, the paper in her pocket crinkling every time she moved. The letter said his name was Harold Dunn. A widower. Owned land and cattle. Needed a wife to raise his 2 children. Promised warmth. Promised honesty. Promised kindness. She had crossed 3 states for that promise. When the stage finally stopped in the thin light of late afternoon, Vera stepped down onto hard, packed earth. She wore a gray wool dress, the hem frayed, her boots scuffed from train platforms and muddy stops. Her eyes searched the platform. A man in his 40s stood beside a wagon. His coat was worn and his face was sharp, impatient. 2 children, a boy and a girl, sat in the back quiet, tired. Vera took a step toward them. "You're Vera," the man barked. "Yes," she said, voice steady. "Vera Ashcombe. I thought you'd be stronger built. You won't last a week with our winters." Vera pressed her lips together. "I will carry my weight." He grunted and turned to climb onto the wagon. "Get in. I do not like wasting daylight." The ride to the homestead was silent. Vera's eyes drifted to the children. The girl, maybe 7, clutched a rag doll. The boy, a few years older, stared at the road like he was somewhere else. That night, Vera made stew from dried beans and old salt pork. Harold did not thank her. When the children tried to speak during supper, he snapped at them to hush. Vera kept her head down and said nothing. Days passed. Then weeks. Harold was not cruel with fists, but with words. Every mistake she made, overcooked oats. A missed patch of dirt on the floor was met with ridicule. When she asked about the children's clothes, he told her sewing was a waste of time. When she tried to brush the girl's hair, he told Vera she was spoiling her. One night, Vera found the boy, Wyatt, outside in the cold, curled behind the barn with his coat off. She wrapped him in a quilt and carried him back inside. Harold watched from the doorway. "They are not yours, do not act like they are." She said nothing. She was tired of saying things that were not heard. 3 months in, Harold stopped coming home every night. He would ride off before sunrise and come back well after dark. Sometimes not at all. Vera never asked where he went. She just kept the fire lit and made sure the children were fed. Then came the morning he left and did not come back. A blizzard rolled in that night. The wind screamed through the chinks in the walls. The children huddled close as Vera built up the fire, using what little wood they had left. By the 2nd day, the food was gone. By the 3rd, Wyatt whispered, "Is he coming back?" Vera held his hand and lied. "Yes." On the 4th morning, Vera hitched up the old wagon horse. She wrapped the children in blankets, packed what flour remained, and started toward the nearest ranch 10 miles south. They never made it. The wagon wheel snapped on a slope, half buried in snow. Vera got the children out and pulled them beneath the trees for shelter. Her hands were raw from the cold. She tried to start a fire, but the matches were damp, useless. Then, through the howling wind, came the sound of hooves. A horse broke through the white haze, its rider tall in the saddle, rifle slung across his back. His coat was thick buffalo hide, dusted with snow. His eyes scanned the scene and landed on Vera. He dismounted fast. "What happened?" he asked, crouching beside her, his voice low, urgent. "The wheel broke," Vera said. Her lips were numb. "We were trying to find help." The children clung to her. The man pulled off his gloves and handed them to Wyatt. "Names, Vera Ashcombe, these are the children, Wyatt and Willa." He looked at her for a long second. Then he said, "I am Owen Fletcher. My ranch is 3 miles east. You are coming with me." He lifted Willa, then Wyatt, wrapping them in his coat. Vera tried to stand but staggered. Owen caught her gently by the arm. "You will stay awake. You will keep walking. I will not let you freeze out here." Vera looked up at him. Something in his voice, calm, steady, broke something loose in her chest. They reached his ranch an hour later. Owen's house was warm, solid, the fire already roaring. He laid the children near it, gave them broth, and draped blankets around their shoulders. Then he turned to Vera. "You are shaking," he said. "I am fine." "You are not." She tried again to speak, but her eyes blurred. Then her knees gave, and he caught her before she fell. "Now you will know kindness," he said. His voice was quiet, fierce. Vera's breath caught. Warmth settled over her, not from the fire, but from his hands, steady on her arms. His eyes searched hers like he wanted to see everything she had carried and carry it with her. In that moment, her body remembered what it felt like to be safe. She had not known that in a long time. He helped her to a chair, brought her tea, sat across from her, elbows on his knees, watching her with careful eyes. "You were a mail-order bride?" he asked. She nodded. "I thought I was going somewhere safe, somewhere good." He looked at the children asleep beside the fire. "They yours?" "No, but I could not leave them." Owen nodded slowly. "You will not have to." The room was quiet. The wind outside had died down. Vera stared into the flames. "I do not know where to go." "You are here now," he said. "You do not need to leave." She looked at him. His words were simple, but something in the way he said them made her chest ache. She did not answer, but for the first time she did not feel alone. Morning filtered through the frost-covered windows, pale and still. Vera stirred at the sound of boots across the floorboards. She blinked against the light and found Owen already dressed, rolling his sleeves past his elbows, kettle balanced over the hearth. She sat up slowly on the settee, the wool blanket slipping from her shoulders. Willa was curled beside her, a hand tucked beneath her chin, while Wyatt had taken to the braided rug, sprawled on his stomach, face turned toward the fire's last embers. "You slept hard," Owen said, not turning from the hearth. "I didn't mean to," Vera murmured. Her voice was hoarse. "I meant to help." "You did," he said simply. "You got them through." She drew the blanket tighter. "Do you have work this morning?" "I've got fence line to check." "Ice dropped the west wire overnight, but the barn's well stocked. You'll have what you need." Vera hesitated, eyes on the kettle. "I can cook." "I don't doubt it," he said, finally glancing over. "But you don't have to earn a place here, Vera. You already walked through enough blizzards." She looked away, not trusting the heat that rose behind her eyes. Later, after Owen rode out, Vera found her way to the kitchen. She moved with quiet purpose, careful not to wake the children. The pantry was modest but orderly, with sacks of cornmeal, jars of dried apples, and a crock of lard. She set to work, hands steadying with each motion, mixing, pouring, stoking the stove to life. By the time the children woke, the scent of corn cakes filled the kitchen. Willa blinked up at her with surprise, and Wyatt sat straighter, rubbing his eyes. "I ain't had breakfast smell like that in a long time," he said. Vera gave him a soft look. "Then we'll change that." They ate at the table, the three of them close around one plate. Willa leaned against Vera's side without asking, and Wyatt took seconds without flinching. Afterward, Vera found a basket by the door and carried it to the lean-to where firewood was stacked. She worked through the morning, hauling armfuls into the house, brushing snow from her sleeves, stacking each piece with care near the stove. By midday, the wind picked up again. Vera kept the children busy with needlework and carding wool from a bag Owen had left by the hearth. Willa's stitches were crooked, but she was patient. Wyatt asked about the loom tucked in the corner, and Vera told him she'd teach him to weave if he liked. The door opened as the sun dipped, and Owen stepped in, his coat dusted with snow. He paused when he saw the fire built high, the table set for supper, and the children sitting clean and quiet with hands folded. "I wasn't expecting all this," he said, pulling off his gloves. Vera stood from the pot she'd been stirring. You've done more than I can repay." He stepped near the stove and held out his hands to the heat. "I didn't do it for repayment." She met his eye across the room. "I know." That night, after the children were in bed, Vera sat by the hearth, mending one of Wyatt's sleeves. Owen poured 2 mugs of coffee and handed one to her before settling into the chair opposite. He watched her for a time before speaking. "You got people back east?" Vera kept her eyes on the fabric. "No one left." He nodded slowly. "You thinking of leaving once the thaw comes?" She folded the finished sleeve over her lap. "I hadn't decided." Owen leaned forward, forearms braced on his knees. "You don't owe me an answer, but I'd like you to know this place isn't just roof and boards. It's yours if you want it. Not by obligation, not as a favor." Vera looked at him, the fire lighting the planes of his face. She studied the way he didn't flinch from her gaze, how he didn't press her, didn't try to fill the silence. "I was never asked what I wanted," she said quietly. "You are now." She felt something shift in her chest again, less like breaking and more like thawing. She rose without speaking and set the mended shirt on a small table near the stair. Then she turned back to him. "I'll stay," she said. Owen nodded once. She sat again, her hands still, her breath even. Outside, the wind howled across the open basin. But inside, there was warmth and light and something beginning. Not loudly, not quickly, but true. The March thaw crept in slow, loosening frost from fence rails and softening the earth beneath Owen's boots. By the time the creek behind the barn began to run again, Vera had taken to standing on its bank in the early dusk, watching the melt ripple and break over stones. She didn't speak during those moments. She didn't need to. The land was doing what it knew, enduring and beginning again. She was learning how to do the same. Inside, the days had found their rhythm. Vera kept to Owen's house without being asked, stitching Willa's dresses from worn muslin and teaching Wyatt to cut kindling with careful hands. Owen never told her what to do, nor did he ask when she took to marking the pantry shelves in chalk so she could track what they had. She did it because she could, because no one stopped her. One morning, Owen brought in a crate of tools from the shed and set it on the kitchen floor. "I'd like to fix the porch rail before the next rain sets in," he said. "But the south post's gone soft." Vera pushed her sleeves up. "I've stripped rot from pine before, I can help." He looked at her, not surprised but thoughtful. "You ever use a draw knife? Show me." They worked side by side beneath a sky thick with cloud. Owen shaved the post down as Vera steadied the board, her fingers wrapped in oilcloth to guard against splinters. When the last strip of old wood fell away, she ran her palm along the grain, firm and clean. "You ever think about building something from the ground up?" Owen asked, brushing sawdust from his cuffs. "I used to. When I was a girl," she said quietly, "but I didn't have a place to do it. You do now." He didn't say it like a gift, he said it like a truth. That evening, after the children were asleep, Vera sat at the table, sorting thread into neat coils. Owen leaned against the wall, arms folded, watching her hands work. "You ever miss the place you came from?" he asked. "No." She tied a knot at the end of the thread. "But I miss the version of myself I left behind there," he nodded once. "I reckon we all leave someone behind when we go." She set the needle down and looked at him. "Did you? My father. He died before I turned 20. He never saw what I made of this land." Vera's voice softened. "Was he hard on you?" "No, just quiet. But he taught me to keep what's good and let the rest go." "I never learned that part," she said. "You have time." She drew in a breath, held it, then let it go slow. "Do you want me here, Owen? Not out of pity, not for the children's sake." "Me." He stepped forward, slow and sure. His voice was low, steady. "I want you here because when you walk into a room, it feels like it's worth standing in. Because you get up before dawn and make this place feel lived in. Because they smile more when you're near." Vera's throat tightened. You waited to say that. I wanted to be sure it wasn't kindness speaking, or loneliness. She looked up at him, the lamplight catching the brown in his eyes, the places where time had carved quiet lines into his face. I've never had a choice before, she said. You do now. She rose and stepped toward him, slow and certain. He reached for her hand and she let him take it. Then I choose you, she said. His thumb brushed over her knuckles, not as a promise, but as something already kept. Outside, the wind shifted, and the first rain of spring began to fall, soft against the roof. It fell for hours, gentle and patient, washing the last of winter from the land. By the time the cottonwoods budded and the snowmelt carved deep into the gullies beyond the pasture, the house had grown quieter in a way that felt full, not empty. Mornings came earlier. Vera rose with the gray light, not from obligation, but because she wanted to. She'd begun tending the small patch of earth behind the barn, clearing it of last year's weeds and turning it with Owen's old spade. Her hands blistered, but she didn't mind. The soil was dark and cold and honest. One late afternoon, Owen returned from the far ridge with a burlap sack and a tired gait. He set it down on the porch and rested his hand against the post they'd repaired together. I met with the Smithsons, he said as Vera stepped outside, wiping her hands on her apron. They're moving east. Sold off their chickens for near nothing. She knelt to untie the sack. Inside, 6 hens shifted, feathers fluffed from the ride, and one young rooster blinked up at her with a wary eye. I thought you might want them, he said. You keep a steadier hand than I do. Vera touched the edge of the sack, then looked up. I used to watch my mother collect eggs before sunup. She never let the hens see her hesitate. You don't seem the hesitating kind. She didn't answer, but her mouth curved just slightly, and she lifted the sack to carry it toward the coop he'd helped her patch together last week. That night, Wyatt brought in a bundle of dried grasses to line the nest boxes, and Willa stood beside Vera while she scattered feed. Neither asked questions. They just joined in, like they understood something deeper than words. Later, after supper, when the children had gone upstairs, Vera lingered by the hearth, running her fingers along the grain of the table Owen had built years ago. He stood beside the window, arms crossed, watching the last light fade behind the butt. I've been thinking, he said, voice low, about the north field. She looked up. What about it? It's been fallow 2 seasons. I've left it alone since the calves came early last spring, but with someone here who knows her way around soil. He let the thought hang. Vera stepped closer. What would you plant? Barley maybe, or oats, something that can feed both livestock and belly. I could keep it turned. If you've got enough seed, I can get it. They stood close now, the quiet between them easy. Outside, the wind had died. The only sound was the ticking of the kettle on the iron stove. You're not just surviving anymore, Owen said. No, she agreed. I'm not. He looked at her then, long and certain. I'd like to marry you, Vera, not just for the sake of what we've built here, but because when I think of this place, I think of it with you in it. Her breath caught. Not from surprise she'd known it was coming, but from the weight of it, the way he said it without ceremony, without hesitation. I've never been asked like that, she said. You're being asked now. She stepped in, placed her hand over his. Yes, Owen. There was no rush to the moment, no leap of breathless joy, only something solid like 2 hands meeting in the dark and finding they fit. He brushed her cheek with the back of his fingers, slow and careful. You'll have your name on everything here, Vera. On the land, the house, the future. I already do, she whispered. They stood there as the fire burned low, the light wrapping around them like the first warmth of spring. She leaned into him, not with need but with trust. He held her steady and neither of them moved away. Outside, The hens settled in their new roost. The garden lay waiting beneath a blanket of stars, and the land exhaled beneath the turning season. Inside, Vera and Owen stood together, no longer strangers, no longer waiting. By early June, the barley had taken root in the north field, soft green shoots waving beneath a sky that stretched wide and blue. Vera rose before the sun most days, not from habit, but from a quiet eagerness she couldn't name. The earth was steady work, and her hands had learned it again, remembered what it was to plant something and believe it might grow. She wore her hair pinned back now, not to hide it, but to keep it out of the way. There were hens to feed, rows to weed, and sometimes, when the wind was still and the porch was shaded, she would sit with a ledger and map out what they'd need come harvest. Owen had built her a narrow bench beneath the kitchen window for her ledgers and her shears, and she filled its drawers with careful order. One evening, she found him beside the corral, mending a split rail with quiet precision. His sleeves were rolled, his jaw shadowed with days in the sun. She watched him a moment before speaking. "I've been thinking about the loft above the barn," she said. He looked up, wiping his brow with the back of his wrist. "What about it? If we move the feed barrels to the lower stalls, that space could be fitted with shelves, a place for drying herbs. Maybe even storing preserves come fall." His mouth lifted just slightly. "You've already thought it through." "I have," she said. "There's no sense in wasting good space." He set the hammer down. "You've made this whole place stretch wider, Vera, not just the rooms. The days." She reached for the leather strap he'd tossed over the fence post and coiled it with practiced ease. "You gave me the room to do it." That night, Wyatt and Willa brought in wild mint from the edge of the creek, their fingers stained green. Vera crushed it into water for the evening wash, and Willa giggled when it tickled her nose. Owen watched them from the doorway, arms folded, quiet in a way that held weight. Later, when the children were asleep and the moon hung low and full, Vera sat beside Owen on the porch. The air smelled of warm dust and pine sap. He passed her a mug of lukewarm coffee and she held it between her palms. "I've been asked to join the school board," he said. She looked over, surprised. "You never mentioned it." "They've been short a man since January. I told them I'd think on it, but I wanted your thoughts first." "Why mine?" "Because you see things I don't. And because if I take it, it'll mean days away, maybe more than a few." She studied his face the way the moonlight caught the curve of his temple. "Will it take you from the land?" "No. But it might take me from supper some nights." She nodded, slow. "Then take it. If it's meant to serve more than just this fence line, then it's worth the time." He didn't answer right away. Just reached over, covered her hand with his. "You keep giving me reasons to be proud," he said. "I'm not trying to. That's what makes it true." She leaned into him then, head to his shoulder, the warmth of him steady against her skin. Weeks passed, and the loft became hers. Owen sawed the beams to her measurements. Wyatt hammered nails where directed, and Willa gathered sprigs of yarrow and lavender to dry along the rafters. Vera filled jars with early greens, labeled each one in tidy script, and kept a ledger by the window just to track what the land had offered. One morning, after the heat had broken with a soft rain, Owen came in from the barn, his shirt damp and collar open. He set his hat on the hook, then crossed the room and rested his hands on her waist. "I filed the papers today," he said. She looked up from the basin. "What papers?" "Our marriage license. We've waited long enough." She dried her hands, heart steady. "Did you put my full name, Vera Ashcombe Fletcher, if you'll have it?" She stepped into him, her voice low. "I already do. They married beneath the cottonwoods just before harvest." Wyatt wore a shirt Vera had stitched herself, and Willa carried a handful of wildflowers tied with blue ribbon. The preacher came from town, and Owen stood tall in a clean coat, His eyes locked on Vera as if she were the only thing in miles worth looking at. She spoke her vows without trembling, without pause. "I have walked through snow and silence," she said, "and I choose you in the warmth." Owen answered without breaking gaze. "I will carry your name like it's stitched into my skin." They kissed as the wind stirred the barley fields behind them, and Willa clapped so hard her ribbon came loose. They built out the loft by fall, shelves packed with jars and bundles tied in twine. Vera taught Willa how to cure roots and Wyatt how to read the weather in the clouds. Owen took the school board seat and returned each evening with stories of boys too restless and girls too sharp for their own good. Their home stayed lit late in the evenings, not from need, but from fullness. Conversations flowed easy. Laughter rose without effort, and every night before bed, Owen would wrap his arms around Vera's waist and rest his chin on her shoulder. "No more waiting," he'd say, and Vera would press her cheek to his and breathe in the quiet truth of it. When winter came again, it did not bring fear. The barn was full, the hearth strong, and the house held not just warmth, but belonging. Vera had crossed 3 states for a promise once. She never left again.